Good afternoon. The time is now 2 o'clock, and we'll call this meeting of the Oklahoma City Deferred Compensation Board, November 20th, to order. Item number 2 on our agenda is the approval of the minutes.
I will approve.
Okay, let's look for a motion in a second. Cast your votes.
In the nick of time.
And the motion passes. Let's see, next on our agenda is a presentation from Voya. We have Trampus Bright here with us this afternoon from Voya, just to give an update on where we are in the transition and answer other questions we might have.
Sounds good. Hello, everyone. Thanks for letting me be here today. I thought I would give just kind of a brief presentation on where we are at the transition, kind of what's taken place, and basically what we have left to do. So if we go to the next slide. So a couple of the key items, as far as documentation, the plan documents, the service agreements, and trust agreements, we're expected final sign-off here by the first week of December. A lot of that's being reviewed back and forth with the city, but we don't see any issues there. We almost have all the plan document provisions documented, just going over a final review, and we'll have that ready to be signed off on. As far as the 427 self-directed brokerage account, so we have the process identified to provide those waivers that we discussed last go around, instructions how to sign up for the service. So basically how that's going to work, all that's going to flow through the retirement office. So if a participant wants to sign up, they would reach out to the retirement office. There's a waiver that they would sign that can also be faxed in and signed by that participant. Once the account setup is active and ready to go, then they'll have full access through the Voya participant website through that single sign-on, the Schwab. So the process has been identified and everything looks good there. Any questions with that? Next, as far as testing, still in the process of testing, pretty normal at this point. We continue to meet with the retirement office to finalize our requirements. We're testing internally at Voya through the participant website and interface, the payrolls, et cetera. So don't see any issues there. And then as far as the conversion files, Voya has received the test files from both current vendors, and we have no issues to report on that. On the next slide, as far as communications, a lot of progress has been made here, working with the retirement office. We have the announcements and transition notices, which have already been sent out to participants. The transition website is active and available for participants to get information on the transition. We have the Go Live mailer, which will be mailed out during the week of the transition. That's already been approved and ready to send as soon as we get okay through the transition. And then the 457 plan overview. We have a couple items in review with the retirement office. Think of 457 and 401A enrollment materials and the distribution materials. So all of that's been reviewed by the retirement office to make sure those are all in good shape. And then at this point in time, Voya is creating for the city to review an e-booklet, additional letters regarding the required minimum distributions, the brokerage transfer, how that's going to work, the self-directed brokerage account. There'll be letters going out on that service, and then also on the managed account. So if they were in managed accounts with either Mission Square or Nationwide, we'll give them information on what's going to transpire there. So that's all being worked on now. Any questions with communications?
As far as there was discussion about getting a Roth, 457 Roth option.
Right.
Do we have an ETA on that?
So not from Voya's side. So what we've done behind the scene is we've set that up and it's ready to go. So whenever the city decides to turn that function on, the Roth option, it'll be completely ready to go. So really that's just waiting on the board's approval and the city to approve that for use with the participants.
Amy?
On the next slide.
I've got one question. I was just going to see on the required minimum distributions, since this is happening right there in December for retirees, will you be notifying them, or does that come from like Nationwide or Mission Square? I, not being a retiree, I don't know what kind of notification normally goes out for required minimum distributions. Does that?
So it's my understanding we're sending a notification to those participants that those RMDs may come early this year than what they've normally received, so they can get it out prior to the transition.
Okay, great. So in essence, you're just kind of making sure it happened.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
because the timing is right around that time.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
Yep, that's
Okay,
been taken care
thank
of.
Also, with the retirees, thanks for bringing that up, Doug. We can think about that. It's the fixed accounts. 25% of our assets are in fixed accounts. And if my understanding is there's a 5-year buyout from Voya, from Nationwide and Mission Square. What does that entail?
So with the fixed account, there's a lot of restrictions on moving money away from Nationwide. So there's a 5-year spread payment in order to get those assets away from Nationwide. Whatever those assets are in the fixed account will remain at Nationwide over those 5 years, and then they'll send Voya 20% of that account every single year. So in order to make that beneficial to the participant, through our proposal in the RFP, we offered what we call the Voya blended rate accounting solution. So basically, when the participant signs on to their website on the week of the December 23rd, that's when the go live would be, it's going to look as if all of their assets are here at Voya. So we're basically fronting those assets until we receive those payments from Nationwide. Along with that, some of those Nationwide accounts have guaranteed minimums, which will continue. It depends on the contract. I think there's 5 different contracts at Nationwide, and there's different provisions for each one of those contracts as far as guaranteed minimums that will be upheld throughout the transition. So then we'll take whatever those guaranteed accounts are, along with our crediting rate, which is currently 3.75%, and have a blended rate accounting for that crediting rate going forward.
Okay. So 20% of those 800 million, I can't remember exactly what the numbers are, will come over the first year and then 20% between
That's
for the next
correct.
5 years. Secondary to Nationwide not releasing all the funds at one time.
What was that second statement?
Secondary to Nationwide not wanting to release the funds all at one time.
Correct, yeah. It's a, you know, an older fixed account. Those are the type of
And so
restrictions they have
Voya,
on it.
I'm just for clarification, so the end user will still see a Voya account, but it'll be handled by Nationwide? If they're in that 80% that first year? Or how does that,
If I'm a participant and I have $10,000 in the Nationwide account, on day one, it's going to look like I have $10,000 at Voya. So if
Are
they
they gonna
wanted to move
determine
money out
whether
of
they're
that,
gonna
if they
be in
want to
the
take a
Voya
distribution,
account?
they can do that.
how are they going to determine which, you guys said you would honor the 4 different tiers that were contracted out through Nationwide until that, all those assets are moved over a year 5, and then what happens?
That's correct. So all of their guaranteed minimums that's offered with those contracts, they'll continue to uphold those throughout that 5-year transition. And then we'll take whatever those rates are with whatever assets we get from Nationwide, along with our current crediting rate and the future contributions, and come up with a blended rate.
Okay.
So Trampus, would it be accurate to say for the participant, it is going to look just like it would, like whatever, like you said, $10,000 on the day before, you're gonna have $10,000, but truly on Voya's back end that the participant never sees, that's where the complexities in the accounting
That's correct. That's
back
correct.
office stuff happens.
That's correct.
Okay.
So if an employee wants to pull out that money at that time, y'all are gonna front it. It's gonna come out
That's
of your,
correct.
okay, just,
Correct.
okay. And I had one more question I've been getting. I got one more question. If we get, I've been getting a lot of questions about a pro account. I can't find this in the information that we had. If we have an employee that's been in Nationwide's pro account, will it map directly over to your pro account, or is that something they have to sign up for or do themselves?
Great question. It'll map directly over to our account, and we'll have a free look period. I think the free look is 90 days. Okay. On the next slide, this was just kind of a review of some of the transition education we've already had here at Voya. So we were available at the retiree benefit fair October 22nd and 23rd, and also the current employees benefit fair the 28th through the 1st. Had a lot of interest in getting signed up for the plans. We took all those names down. We also gave them the option to go ahead and call Nationwide or Mission Square now if they wanted to get enrolled immediately, or we took their names down. So we'll reach out to them as soon as we go live. But I would say we had more than 50 folks at all those benefit fairs that want to get signed up for the plan, so that's pretty exciting.
Travis,
next slide
I was
is
just
visual.
I really saw a lot of the traffic at the open enrollment and the level of care. So I just wanted to give you all kudos on
Thank you.
the feedback that we've got on the attention from the time for our open enrollment and our retirees.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yep.
Service hours, because that was always a big concern, at least on the fire side, because we have so many off-site facilities, 38, that if you start crunching the numbers, we could theoretically crush about 2/3 of that 480 hours.
Yeah, so just to be clear, transition, none of that's included. I mean, we want to have a very good first impression. I mean, that's where you win employees and participants over, so none of that's included. Yes, the 60 days of service, that was what was agreed and asked of Voya for the first year, and then 40 days going forward the second year through the 5th year. Again, that's totally adjustable. We have those additional levels of service in the service agreement. So if the city ever says we need additional days, we can definitely add to that.
Okay, what's the upcharge for additional days?
I don't have that on me. I want to say it's $3 for every $20 additional service. But I'll check on that. I'll have to get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
But yes, here's just a visual kind of where we are. Again, no concern to the transition. Peckle & Wood has been a very smooth transition on all fronts. And we're still looking for that go live of December 23rd, 2024. And then the last slide was just, again, some more transition information resources for participants. As I said, the transition website's available and active. There's a lot of information out there on Voya, on frequently asked questions, on what to expect, kind of the important dates and key items that a participant would need to be aware of. Our call center is open as of October 21st of this year, and then, of course, we have local reps available as well. So far, so good on all fronts with the transition.
Trampus, for those that didn't make it out to the open enrollment and didn't get a chance to meet the local reps, can you say a few words about like who we're going to have here locally, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, that area?
Yeah, we have Rebecca McGee. She's local here, and Jessica as well is just an hour down the road. They're both local. They're bringing on a third advisor to work the plan. They're very knowledgeable. They've been in the business for over 20 years, very engaging with participants. Again, we had a lot of great feedback throughout those enrollment benefit fairs, so it's been very positive with their interaction with the participants.
I apologize, I was hitting the wrong button. When we call in, do we need to call the local people here then, since they're here, or do we call the 800 number?
Either or. We don't have a preference. It's if if a participant gets a good comfortability with their local advisors, then they can definitely reach out to them first. Or if it's a quick question, they want to call a call center, they can do that as well. We have the participant website, and then we also have the mobile app. So pretty much available 24 hours a day for anyone, depending on the method of communication they want to reach out to Voya with.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Trampus?
Okay.
I think so. And there was no
Thank you.
action item on this one, so I think we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is to receive the investment consultant report. Kevin Moore from Asset Consulting Group is here.
Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone. If we could start on page 8, please. Yes, this page. Just a quick high-level overview of where things stood at the end of September. Just in conjunction with the transition, this report is going to be adjusted once everything goes live with all new options. We'll update all the balances, all the performance for the different funds that were approved at the August board meeting. But when you look at page 8 here, at the total plan level across all 4 of these, you see nearly $550 million in assets. We've generally seen that number continue to go up as part of the growth involved with the markets over the course of this year. We have that breakdown by plan on the subsequent pages. But when you look at the far right-hand corner of the page, far right-hand side, a little bit more than 5,000 participants in total broken out across the 4 different plans. The next couple pages just talk through the current options at Nationwide and Mission Square. Once again, when we get to the fourth quarter report, you'll see some of these options be adjusted in conjunction with that transition, as well as starting on page 12, where you see all of the different balances across all of these options compared to the previous quarter and then compared to the previous year. We'll include all of that new information in the fourth quarter report, and we'll also have that updated performance by fund for both of the plans here. Once again, to my comment before, just about growth in the markets, as you look here from where we stood at September of 2024 versus June of 2024 and September of 2023, you see some consistent increase in balances across the board, which just really speaks to growth in both the stock and the bond market, as you all have probably seen and read. So we have this breakdown across the money purchase plans and the 457 plan. So that's really on all of these pages in this report. The other thing that I will mention here is for the core lineup that you will be transitioning to, we are going to have detailed pages and characteristics on each of those funds that are going to look very similar to what we reviewed at the August board meeting. So more to come on that. The report is going to look quite a bit different from what it does today, just as part as the overall movement of plan assets. So I will stop there and just see if there's any additional questions on any of the underlying funds or balances or the breakouts and how we present those in the quarter report as of today.
Any questions for Kevin? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we are receiving this report, so the Chair would entertain a motion. Cast your votes. And the motion passes. Next on the agenda, we have a couple of items for individual consideration. So this first one is a resolution approving the Vanguard target date funds with a revised pricing and expense credit as an investment option for the Oklahoma City 401A money purchase plan and the 457B deferred compensation plan effective December 18th, 2024. In this particular scenario that we are looking at, in the August meeting for our target date retirement funds, the board selected the Vanguard funds. The alternative was the State Street SSGA fund. For lack of so there's minimum requirements, and so the balances that we had collectively did not meet that to get the pricing level that we originally had seen in the presentations, about 7 basis points, and so there's been an increase. We do have Trampus here because part of this is Voya is offering a credit either for 5 years or up until we get to that point, and so you can add some more clarification there.
Sure, absolutely. So yes, ACG and Voya started working together in June to go through all the investment options, the minimums that they presented in front of the board. We use a third party in order to get those investment minimums. So for example, we're sending out a request to see what the Vanguard Trust CITs, what the minimums are. They came back to the third party as 0, but then as we got through the process, started filling out those trust documents, we were notified that there's actually a $500 million minimum on those Vanguard Trust CITs. So the other option and what the city would qualify for would be the Vanguard TDF mutual funds. There's about a 1.5 BIP difference in those two different target date suites. So Voya is going to credit the city the 1.5 BIP reduction difference for those target date suites for until the assets actually reach 100 million or for 5 years. And we'll just put that into an expense account, and then the city can either reimburse that back to participants or pay plan expenses.
And I would point out that even with the additional basis points, it's still lower than the SSGA option, which was about 9 basis points, and significantly lower than the 49 to 69 that we had previously through the nationwide in Mission Square. So if you look at perspective here, the 1.5 basis points is fairly small, but for transparency's sake, we wanted to come here, talk this through, make sure the board approved before we made any actions on that. So do you have any questions on this item?
I've got a question. I just want to make sure I understand, when you said the target rate retirement CITs, in essence, was that kind of like an institutional level of these funds, and we're now having to go with kind of like the retail type version? Or I guess, what's the difference?
Yeah, so it's not a collective investment trust, so that those are not available until you get to 500 million. So it's still better than the retail share class. It's still the institutional share class, but just not the collective investment trust.
Okay. And I guess maybe the other piece would just be the 1.5 basis points that that Voya is going to credit that. Is that just more of a trying to be a good partner? Because I mean, it wasn't necessarily a change from your perspective. It was just that the information you had was incorrect.
Just bad information. Again, ACG did a fantastic job of kind of reaching out to Voya, going through all the investments, doing the due diligence. We reviewed and double-checked those funds, but then when it came time to actually move those funds, that's when we were notified that there was a $500 million requirement. So we just wanted to reimburse that back to the city.
And I guess, is that something we're going to have to take action on in terms of what to do with that money that comes back? Or does that go back automatically to the accounts of the people who own that?
Because there is an option, I would imagine that would have to be an action of the trust.
Okay.
Or the board, excuse me.
And just to clarify, it's not a reimbursement, it's expense credit.
Actually, that was my question. Is how would that money be credited back? But I think we know now. We will answer that question.
It's going to be in an account, basically, and we would decide how to use it?
Correct. We could run a report at the end of the year. Whoever's in those target date retirement funds, we could distribute the money back on a pro rata basis.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions for Trampus? Okay. With that, we can take a motion. We have a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. And the item passes. Next is going to be the meeting schedule for the 2025 calendar year for the Oklahoma City Deferred Compensation Board. Please cast your votes. And the motion passes. That brings us in our agenda to the next item, comments from board, staff, and citizens. We do have a few comments to be made. First, let's go with the staff comments. Gina from the Retirement System Office just wants to give us kind of an update on where we are on the transition from the retirement office side.
Hello. Just wanted to give a quick update on everything that's been going on from the retirement office. Some of it Trampus has touched on, and some of it I know everybody keeps hearing that we're working on it, so I wanted to let you know what we've been working on. And so he did mention the outreach and open enrollment. The retirement team did spend 2 weeks out with the open enrollments. They did a great job working very closely with Voya. I do think it did raise awareness of the plan, and as he mentioned, we took it was close to 100 names of people who wanted to sign up and follow up with the Voya representatives that were there about trying to set up an account after the turn of the year. And then we have been working with the files and the conversion information. We've sent the first test file to Voya this week. Been working very closely with consultants about the self-service setup. Moving from 2 plans to 1 required some new plan codes, general ledger accounts, and setup options on how everything's going to run. We will be sending 2 files to Voya every week. One of them is a demographic file that include basic employee information. That way it'll load all the active participants. They won't have address information. It'll make it easier for when they go out to the self-service to sign up. Then we will also send a payroll file each pay period. All the enrollment elections are going to be captured on the Voya site, and Voya is going to pass a feedback file back to the city to load into Oracle to set up the payroll deductions. During the blackout period, we will be working on terminating all the existing accounts in Oracle and having to go through basically a new implementation to set up all the new accounts with whatever they had currently elected. Some people did have elections in both Mission Square and Nationwide, so we're going to have to combine those accounts into one deduction and different things along those lines. These plan changes did also have a city ordinance update, and so that was passed by City Council yesterday. We updated the definitions. The current plans for the Mission Squared money purchase plan had the associated plan numbers with Mission Squared included. So we've updated those to say like it's an open plan or a closed plan. We added COPTA to eligible employees to participate in the 457 as of January 1st. We're allowing the employees of the retirement system to elect the money purchase plan, and just some overall cleanup and clarifying language. I know Trampus mentioned some of the plan document review. I know the municipal counselor's office and I have been working very closely with our tax counsel pretty regularly for about 2 months now about the plan documents, the trust agreements, and custodial agreements. We're having to work with accounting services to add new employee identification numbers for the trust. We've amended and restated and made some compliance reviews to make sure all items are consistent between the plans. The compensation definition on the money purchase plan is going to match that of the pension plan. We've had to do a requirement for declaring mandatory contributions to the money purchase plan are considered pickup contributions by the employer. And then we've had to amend and restate the Mission Square plan while simultaneously merging and transferring the nationwide plan. So when you're going from 2 plans, you've actually got to take a formal action to merge it to one going forward. We've had resolutions and participation agreements with each of the participating trusts, so Zoo, COPTA, Golf, ERS, and then the city all had to have separate resolutions come across with all these to give signing power. And then once those documents are ready, we'll be able to get those documents signed before December 18th when we go live with Voya. After we get the plans and the trust documents finalized and signatures, we can really hone in on the CIT investment documents and the swab account. On the next slide, Mary Ellen, we have a sample of what the waiver form is going to look like. We have that put together. We're not ready to release it yet just because we're not ready to receive them yet. And so we can't start receiving them in the retirement office until we have that workflow set up and the swab account ready to start. What's going to happen is, as Trampus mentioned, the retirement office is going to receive the waiver forms, and then we will save them to each person's file, and we'll be able to give them some instructions along with the codes that they're going to need to set up that swab account. And then just with some of the communication pieces, I'm more of a visual person, so I wanted to show you kind of some of the communication that we've been working on and that we're proofing. The next document we have, let's see, is the postcard that's going to be going as we go live. It kind of gives information about how to register, how to get a PIN, how to sign up. So that'll be going out that week in December. The next slide we have, we're working on some enrollment guides that'll go out or that we'll have for new hire orientations or anybody who wants to sign up for the plan. It gives basic information, eligibility, how to access the accounts. And then we also have a distribution guide that we've been working on. So when you separate employment, what distribution options do you have and how do you access your money? We're still working on a video for new employee orientation that we'll be able to post on our websites for anybody who has questions. I've been in touch with Fire about coming out to capture those recruits that are graduating in January to do a special enrollment for them, so that's already been set up. And then we have an outreach that we're working on with Voya for late January, early February to kind of go out to the different areas and give some more education that way. So if there's any special requests that you have or something comes up, reach out to the retirement office and we'll do our best to try and accommodate. So that's all I have.
Question about the brokerage account, the self-directed brokerage account. I've had a couple of calls about how that's actually going to work, and I don't know if the process is exactly set yet, but once that form is sent back to y'all and we're in this window, this December 23rd timeframe, what are the steps that our employees will actually go to set up that brokerage, get money transferred over, and start investing inside that Schwab, and kind of a timeline of how that looks too?
We're working on getting some print screens, some full instructions set up, but what will happen is after we receive the signed waiver, the retirement office will be able to provide like a plan number and a sponsor ID number and any specific information to that person so they can go out to the SWAB site electronically and sign up for it. And then once they sign up based on the codes that we give them, it will automatically tie back to the Voya account to be able to transfer.
Thank you.
I would say the self-directed brokerage is the number one question that I get from different employees across the city.
Right, and so we just want to make sure we do it right, and so we want to get all that information lined out before we start releasing anything.
A January academy starting with 70-plus recruits, so I'll get in touch with you I'd like for y'all to start coming out there again. We used to do that, and then we had 2, and then they kind of quit that, but I think the training center would be willing to let the representative come out there, get people signed up when we teach our financial classes for our first responders out there, to go ahead and have that be part of it, to have the option to get signed up as well.
Okay, sounds great.
All right, thank you, Gina. We have also got a representative from the Fraternal Order of Police. Rob, are you going to take this one? Yes. Okay, Rob Gallifan.
Good afternoon. Before I get into the issues I've identified with this transition, I have a few questions based on the comments made by the representative from Voya. So the fixed account, from what I understand the fronting of assets. So basically, if I have my money in a nationwide fixed account and I don't want to participate in the Voya fixed account and instead want to transfer it to, let's say, a target date fund, it's my understanding that Voya is going to front the balance I had in the nationwide account to the target date fund? That's correct. Okay. On the 480 hours, is that basically the education component of this contract?
That is correct. Gina, is that? Okay, yes.
So 480 hours shared citywide among 5,000 employees?
That is correct.
So to Mr. Yaw's point earlier, he's got 36 stations. Is it 480, is it a month? No, it's 60 days, is that a year? 60
That's
days per year for 5,000 employees. Was that what we had with Nationwide and Mission Square? Did they have a cap on that?
It was similar for one part. I don't have those numbers directly in front of me. Gina, could you step up here so we can have that for the record?
Yeah.
It was similar to one of them, and then there was also a way that one of the groups was counting hours for like each location, I think counted as a different day, whereas they might have been there for 2 hours or whatever the case was. And so there was not apples to apples comparisons on some of the hours, but as Trampus had mentioned, we have it built into the contract that if we need more hours, it is an option to add. So we will be working on allocating those, working with the different groups to make sure that we have plenty of coverage. And we did reduce the hours that are needed for new hire orientation. Currently, we have the representatives that had been coming out every 2 weeks to the city new hire orientations. And so we have a deferred comp specialist that goes down and handles that now along with the video. So that cuts out a good portion of the hours that we previously had.
So if who pays for the upcharge? If they charge the upcharge, who pays? How's that paid for?
If we add the additional hours, it would go across as the record keeping fee, so it'd go across with everybody.
Okay. So if fire, I said to Mr. Gall's point, 36 stations, if they consume 60 days, and I understand how they could, if police or AFSCME needed additional days for education, essentially the rest of us all pay for the upcharge?
Well, I mean, we can look at it different ways. If fire has a specific need and they want dedicated hours, I'm sure we can allocate those to the fire as such, but these are basically hours. So if they spend 2 hours at a station, you're not going to get counted for a full 8-hour day or whatever the case is. And that was part of the difference, is we can allocate specific hours as needed so that we can hit the different shifts, so that we can hit without counting it all as a day.
Okay.
I think too, part of the deal was too that, if I'm right, the actual transition, the start of this does not count towards our hours.
Okay.
So
And that is correct.
Because that's where our big concern was this first couple months, we expect there to be some issues and we need everybody, all hands on deck. But after that, I figure as this goes on yearly, that's where we estimated this would be an approximate amount that would service all of our members.
If a member calls, I know you mentioned 2 representatives, if they call a representative about a question about their deferred comp plan, does that come out of the hourly bank?
That is not.
That's separate?
That's not. That's
completely
separate.
Okay. And there's no restriction on that service?
No, and then also the Voya does have their general customer service line, correct, that we can ask some of those questions.
Okay. All right, thank you.
If I could, they also have their app. So they've got their app, their customer service line, the rep, as well as our training hours. So there's multiple that's not counted into that allocation.
Okay. So basically, I'm Rob Gallivan. I'm with the Oklahoma City Fraternal Order of Police. I'm the vice president. I've been a city employee for about 15 years. I'm a participant in the plan since day one with Nationwide. I have $115,000 currently vested in the program, worth on paper as of close of the bell yesterday, about $202,000. The fund mapping, one thing I need to address as well, the Voya representative mentioned about documentation being finalized. I don't know if you all realize the benefit guide that you sent out, do you all know you gave the wrong website for the transition in that booklet?
At that point, we didn't know there was a separate transition website, so. The website in the benefit guide is the website going forward past transition. It'll be okc.voya.com. The transition website was govoya.com/OKC. And so that was something that came about after the guides were printed. So.
Right, but there was no effort to email that address to city employees, correct? I mean, I scoured my email, I found no communication.
We can't do blast emails on stuff. The benefits office and the retirement office. We could post it on Inside OKC, but
Right.
we don't have an option to do blast emails.
Well, the city sends out blast emails quite frequently, about at least once a month. I mean, we couldn't have put an update to city employees on that?
As far as like the newsletters or something like that, we could, yes.
Okay. So that, I don't know, it's kind of closing the barn door after the horse gets out. We're transitioning here in about 3 weeks, but for transparency, you all might want to consider sending out the correct links so some of these men and women will actually have a place to go to get information on their fund mapping, the fact sheets. I mean, those are all important things, investing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I would ask that maybe in the next week or so, the board make an effort to put out the correct website address so these men and women can actually get the information that's going to be important to them during this transition.
And I would like to point out that each of the participants should have received a paper mail out from the retirement office with the Voya information, including the fund mapping as well. So there were multiple access points to that.
None of the fact sheets were sent out without a mailer. It was just a fund mapping.
Correct. The fact sheets for the individual investments were not included, but the transition mapping and the transition notice did include the correct website.
Okay.
I could take on that role to make sure we have it sent out.
Thank you.
We'll work, Jenny, get with me and I'll make it happen.
Okay.
So the main reason I came today, I got my fund mapping and took a look at the funds I was going to be mapped over to, and had some concerns over the rates of return for the funds I was being mapped to, in particular one category, which I'll get into later, lower return rates, and I was actually going to be charged a higher fee. It's my understanding the whole point of this transition was to address the fee structure, lowering fees, being more transparent, with fees, which I understand. Yet I don't understand how I'm getting mapped over to a fund that's going to provide less of a return but charge me more. That didn't make sense. So I decided to take a look at the entire police department. I asked Ms. Jordan for a disruption report for both Nationwide and Mission Square. I received Nationwide's the same day. Mission Square has taken longer. It's been about 3 months, but it's my understanding I'll get that report later this week. What I did was I took a look at the disruption report and took a look at about the top 25 funds listed in that report. The top one has 711 officers enrolled in it, down to about the 25th, which has a little bit over 100, because I wanted to see what affected the majority of my members. And what I found caused some concern, and so I want to relay those concerns to you. I had a Teams meeting with Mr. Boggs, Ms. Madera, and Ms. Jordan a few weeks ago to kind of have a preliminary discussion over what I had found and to try and answer questions I had about the rates of return and the fee structure. So I'm going to share this with all of you. What essentially I did was a fund comparison. I compared rates of return from the Nationwide funds to the Voya funds where they're being mapped to. In speaking with Mr. Boggs, it's my understanding this board did not do any kind of comparison like that. And I don't understand. I don't understand how we make a transition for 5,000 employees with $500 million in assets, and nobody sits down to take a look at the rates of return with the funds that we're being mapped to. If you look at this first category, an opportunistic fund, I have 697 officers. That's 69% of my department, with money in the Lord Abbott High Yield Fund. The rates of return across the board are higher than what's offered by the Voya alternative. You may point out the expense ratio difference, and I understand that, but if you look at the 5-year return, if we're going to compare apples to apples, if you took $5,000 at 3.5% return compared to 1.8, if I went so far as to double that expense ratio, I still make more of a return compared to Voya. And 69% of my officers are in this boat. You're talking about thousands to tens of thousands of dollars that these men and women could potentially lose by mapping their funds to Voya Pioneer. I was told that the transition to Voya would be, quote, as good or better than what these men and women had currently with Nationwide and Mission Square. I would ask this board, how is this as good or better than what the 697 officers currently invested with Nationwide have? That's not a rhetorical question. How is this better?
With the so with this, and this is not necessarily the format for this, but there is definitely, with the different types of bonds that you have, you know, one of the big goals, and this was presented from every single proposer. This was from every single proposer for both the investment consultant and the record keeper, to trim down the number of funds. And by doing that, we, the board, through Asset Consulting Group, selected a number of high-performing, quality investments with a proven track record. There are instances where you could probably pick and choose between this. So in this particular aspect, the Pioneer, is going to have multiple sectors within it, whereas in the two that selected, both the Lord Abbett High Yield and the Foreign Bond would be subsectors, and so to make sure that our participants had the correct amount of coverage, exposure to those different areas in the market, that's why that was selected. And so that is that way across the board. There are a couple instances where you can, but on the whole, based on the number of participants and the fees, both the performance and the fees would be significant savings when you talk about the 5,000 employees that we have.
The savings don't offset the loss of return. I mean, you can talk about investment strategy all day long. How does this return justify the lower fees?
Well, if we have any participants that are 100% in the high yield fund and foreign bond fund, that would be correct. But looking at the portfolios, which we have that is not the case as we talk about having a diversified portfolio and diversified options. And so for this one, that is true, but there are none that we could see that were 100% just invested in these two options.
Why would you have to have 100%? I've got 69% vested. I mean,
Be appropriate, and I don't know if Kevin's the right person, but for ACG to address this, because my assumption on this is that there are other factors besides simply yield that are going into this in terms of safety of investments, the breadth of the investments, and so again, we can't meet every need. Yield is not the only need, I think, that people who are invested in this have. There's other areas that need to be considered. Now, again, I don't know whether this was the best choice for that perspective, but I think it'd be appropriate to hear from ACG as to why this was selected.
Sure. So just to, this is on. Just to piggyback off the comments that have been made, comparing the high yield fund to what Pioneer is doing is not exactly apples to apples. Pioneer has some high yield, some foreign bonds, some U.S. investment grade, covers a variety of sectors. If you look at just high yield versus multi-sector, like what you're doing, we understand that high yield has done better in a vacuum. But the idea is to trim the number of options in the core lineup, having some options that have more flexibility. Fixed income is one area, opportunistic fixed income is one area. U.S. small mid cap is another area where we opted to not do dedicated mid, dedicated small, instead do small mid. We fully know that in the case of equity, that large has outperformed mid, that's just outperformed small when you look backwards. So taking a mid cap versus a small cap fund is going to create natural differences where if a participant does not want to invest in a more diversified option like Pioneer, they can go the self-directed brokerage route. That's why that's there.
Well, I'll get to that here in a minute. You talk about risks, and I never had complaints from, I've been doing this for 10 years full-time at the FOP. Cops gripe about everything, except this. I never got any phone calls from officers active or retired about the deferred comp, complaints about where their money was being vested in. I'm not aware of any lawsuits. So, I mean, we want to talk about risks. I can't identify any officers who have identified any. And at the end of the day, you've got a rate of return in a category that's going to affect 69% of my members, arguably somewhat significantly.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking backwards at performance, and once again, that's why the self-directed brokerage window is there for those participants that don't want to utilize the chosen options and want to stick with a fund like Lord Abbott's high yield fund. They can still invest in that fund outside of the core lineup.
Okay, we'll come back to self-directed here in a second. Yep. Again, this is another category. This is what I mentioned earlier. We've got 656 officers in the Euro-Pacific Growth Fund who now are going to be transitioned to William Blair. And outside of one 10-year category, they're getting less of a return, significantly less of a return in some categories, and they're paying more in fees.
Yeah, so when you look at this particular fund, you know, William Blair is a best-in-class fund. In this case, we wanted some emerging markets exposure in there, but not in too much. Once again, protecting participants from being overexposed to an area like emerging markets, having non-U.S. developed and emerging markets in one fund on the growth side was what we were going for. And if somebody wants to invest in the American funds, once again, you can do self-directed brokerage there.
I would also point out that just looking from the report that we have that was provided to the board members and also will be available with the just documents, that the nationwide, the American Euro-Pacific Growth Fund, as of September, it was about 1.28% of all nationwide balances. So that the gap that you're pointing out is there. But the impact is very small, as only 1.2% of the assets are actually in that particular fund. And so the overall, when you start looking at the whole big picture, the impact of that is fairly small. That's increased even more when you consider, as you've pointed out, that there are almost 656 members in that particular.
Well, that's just the police side. I mean, I have no idea what the citywide numbers are, so as far as participation level goes. Again, another category to where the returns, if you're saving an expense ratio, I don't see them offsetting the returns. It's a significant difference. And I've got close to 70% of my members in these funds.
Yeah, it's just
Same argument?
It's the small mid versus small only.
Look at the, Look at the returns.
It's apples to oranges, though, in a comparison standpoint. They're not the same types of funds. We're just, once again, trimming the same.
Apples to oranges, but you're mapping them to, you're taking an apple and mapping it to an orange, yes?
Because you're taking a lot of different options and trying to consolidate the lineup. It's the closest thing that we can map it to.
Because we wanted to limit the options.
We wanted to shrink the core lineup and then, once again, create that self-directed brokerage feature.
Again, a significant difference in rates of return that are not going to offset the lowering of fees.
So PIMCO has REITs, commodities, and tips in its diversified real asset strategy, whereas Cohen and Steers is only REITs. We know that REITs have done very well, but it's, once again, it's a completely different strategy meant to be more comprehensive across the real asset space.
They've done really well for over 30 years. I mean, you expect me to go back to my members and talk about REITs and diversified portfolios when the returns are pretty transparent. They are not going to make as much money mapping to these funds as they do now. Do you honestly expect me to take that argument back to my 694 officers who have money in this fund, that the reason why they're taking a hit is because we wanted to limit options and then get into the whole REITs and different categories? That's what you really expect us to do that?
It's a different strategy going forward than what's been there in the past.
And they should take a hit financially for a new strategy?
Once again, I would point out that the Cohen and Steers 1.54% of assets at this point. So the exposure and spread out across almost 700 officers, that is still very small compared to the overall portfolio. So when we're looking at the whole, it's still, all of your members will be better off with this.
Why?
Because you are picking and choosing very small pieces, whereas even significant increases between what the record-keeping fees are for some of those. Think even something with the Fidelity Contra Fund, which has a 7 basis point difference between before and after. That is considerable amounts, sometimes 20% of our entire portfolio in there. So the overall amount is going to be saving is more. So when you take a look at the totality of funds, that's where that comes from.
So 694 of my members are going to have to take a hit for the benefit of the larger group?
1.5% of their assets will take a
hit.
A hit.
Yes.
That is correct.
For the benefit of the whole, whereas they didn't have to do that before.
Rob, if it's a hit, though, it might be a hit in that, but it might be a gain in another part that we've mapped you to. So when you look at it as a whole, what your portfolio's in, because they're not all in this Cohen and Steers. It's going to be whatever the portion of their assets. So they may take a hit on the 1.5%, but they may have 75% in the contra fund and an S&P 500 index fund, where they may gain 3.5%, which is going to offset the difference in this fund. So we're singling out some stuff, and I agree. Some of these I think we could do some work on. I'm not going to argue on that, but you almost need a statistician to start breaking down as to what we're actually looking at, because we could paint a picture on either side of this, I think, because we could really highlight the funds that I think we've done a really good job at. And I could say, Rob, I think you're going to make 3.8% more next year because we picked those funds. And you have 75% of your money, or the department, our police department has 75% of their money in those three funds. Therefore, the department as a whole is going to make more money total. Although they may lose a little money in some of these other smaller funds where they have a little exposure to, as a whole, we're going to make money as a department based on those funds where everybody's money really is.
And Chairman, if I could, just as I think a reminder, our fiduciary responsibility is to the fund. And so obviously, therefore, the employees benefit from it. And our fiduciary responsibility, I'm not a certified financial advisor, so I'm not qualified to be able to go through line by line. That is why the city contracted with the financial consulting group to be able to make those advice, to go through line by line. It would be irresponsible as a fiduciary for us to make those decisions on our own. And what we worked definitely with our consultant to be able to make sure that we had that input and be able to look at the plan as a whole. There might be individuals that might be plus or minus, especially as they are able to do the self-directed fund. But at the end of the day, we are responsible for the fund as a whole. And I just want to make sure that we're very clear in what the board's responsibility is.
I understand that. I think, and I've mentioned this before in prior meetings, I think you all have gone too far with cutting the fund options.
And that is counter to all the advice that we've gotten for everyone that has presented in front of us.
What I can say to that is it's worked for us for 50 years. And I understand we haven't had a deferred comp board. I understand the liability in that. I get that. I understand what we do is not per se the nationwide norm. It's so funny. The city prides itself on being different in so many ways, in so many different areas. But yet we're going to come down here and talk about, well, we have to go with basically a nationwide standard or a norm. We've had a system that's worked for 50 years. From what I can tell on the police side, there have been no complaints about the returns that these men and women are getting in retirement. You've gone from 80 some odd fund options down, from what I can tell, to about 15 or 16, give or take a few. I've got members here. I mean, if you want to argue they only comprise 1.5% of the total fund, I guess I'll have to ask for some more information as far as which funds are more heavily invested in. But nevertheless, in some of these categories, I've got 69, 70% of my members who are going to potentially lose money.
One of the funds that we have only has $200 in assets in it. And that's out of all 5,000 or X number of participants, has $200 in it. And yet we're paying fees for it. Those are the things that we're trying to make sure that we're looking at as an aggregate.
And I as well am not a financial advisor, but I can say that past performance does not guarantee future results, and that we can't with any definitive amount say that this one will underperform the others a year down the road, 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road. So these are the options that we've taken. That's why, regardless of what the current status has been, every one of the funds selected has a proven track record that we were able to look at.
Some of these funds I've pointed out have had proven track records for 30, 40 years.
Well, that's true.
And much longer than some of the funds that Voya is mapping us to. 15, 16 years. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. How do you make that argument when you're getting rid of plans with a 40-year proven track record in favor of plans with less than half of that?
Well, it was part of the strategy.
So about that strategy, it seems to be the only option these men and women have is you can go with the minimum amount of funds that we've selected. If you don't like it, you can take 75% of the value of your fund and go off into the open market after you sign a liability waiver. We talk about concerns over fees, transparency. But we're going to let these men and women who have most of these, I can't speak to the other employee groups, most of these cops, they don't have any experience in investing. but we're so concerned about having a fiduciary responsibility and being transparent and all of those things you've mentioned, but if you don't like the minimal amount of options, you're going to take your 75% of your fund, sign a liability waiver, and go swim with the sharks. It can't be those two options. Those are two extremes. There has got to be a comparable middle ground for these men and women who want more options than what you're giving them. So I would implore this board to engage with ACG or Voya to offer at least one or two more funds in each of these categories. Give them some more options. I cannot tell these members to take a 7% return hit, potentially, because they're paying less in fees. That makes absolutely no sense. Some of these men and women, 3 years from retirement. It can't be those two extremes. You cannot send these men and women out there in the open market with no education, sign a liability away, and best of luck to you. It's irresponsible. And I think you can do better. Thank you.
Any other comments from board members?
So I would just suggest, with the crediting that we're getting back, the 1.5 basis points, that we don't decide on that right away. Maybe in May, we look at that. That could be a way to fund extra days of education or other things like that. Since we don't have a source of revenue for the Deferred Compensation Board, I think it'd be worth seeing if that could be used, again, for education or other means. So I'd like to just give us a little time to see what the needs might be before we decide what to do with that.
Absolutely. Any other comments? Well,
I just got a question, because this isn't going to stop on my side of the house from asking about it. So if this is kind of going to be directed towards ACG, as we as a board can identify some funds that we might be interested in, would it be appropriate for us to, as a board, to submit those to you to evaluate to see if it would be an option to add to our portfolio or to replace a fund that we think is better? I mean, is that kind of how this process would work? Because that's kind of what I've been telling Rob, that's why this board is set up, that if we're not happy with a piece of it, then we can make changes, or at least attempt to make changes.
Yeah, we can talk about that offline. But yeah, like we said before, the self-directed brokerage window is in place for those that want to utilize other funds not in the core lineup. Okay. If you all want us to review other options, we can certainly entertain those conversations.
That's within the scope of our contract with you, though, is kind of what I wanted to make sure.
Well, and I think what goes along the line is we've set up the board, we set up the mapping, we set up the strategy, but we didn't set up anything or a protocol, for lack of a better term, of if the members, because we're fiduciarily responsible to them, right, is if the members show through that there's a better fund that we need to be looking at, what is the process or mechanism for them? Do they go to the individual board members, then we submit it into the board minutes, and then it goes to Voya for evaluation? Or is that, how do we continually adjust our limited scope of funds that we've offered, that if one is underperforming on a consistent basis, we need to shoot it in the head? How do we do that? Is that you shooting it in the head as your fiduciary responsibility?
Yeah, that's our
or is
fiduciary.
us identifying in which case they've identified some
Fire department?
That's
I know that's not the financial technical term. How about eradicate or remove that from the fund list? Or
that's our fiduciary responsibility.
we need to pivot somewhere. How's that in
Correct.
place?
We're doing due diligence on all of the options at all times, meeting with the managers on all fronts, both qualitatively and quantitatively. If there's ever a concern, we will bring that to you proactively. However, with that being said, if you are hearing a lot about a particular fund option, we will weigh in on our opinion on that. Our research group is meeting with managers across all asset classes at all times.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Well, with that, we will adjourn at 3:06 p.m.